The quarter-ounce jig, a workhorse for most anglers single jigging for fluke. From the back bays to the open ocean, it was my go-to weight for years, and when paired with the 6-inch jerkshad, it became one of the deadliest combos for targeting fluke from shore. Most of my personal best catches came on that jig, so why did I move on? Stay tuned. Alright, what's up everybody? We're pushing into July and summer has finally arrived. I was getting worried there for a bit, wondering if we even have a summer this year. As for fluking, it's been tracking well, I'll say. Some of our hunting holes, the spots that typically welcome prize-worthy fluke, took a little longer than usual to produce. And in other stretches of beach, the summer doldrums are setting in. And then for other spots, it's been like the 4th of July since the season began. Just a quick PSA, for those who sign up for my e-course, thank you for the support and believing in the educational product I'm putting out there. This 2-year research project encapsulates everything new I've learned about single jigging for fluke. And it's now available on Udemy, a trusted platform. Link in the description if you want to learn more and enroll. In-person private lessons are going strong this year as well. DM me on Instagram if you're interested. I will say the e-course complements the in-person lessons with the underwater footage you can't replicate live. Now back to the loaded question. What about the quarter-ounce jig made me consider moving on? This takes us back to 2017 when I started targeting fluke with a single jig and experimenting with the technique that came to known as the pendulum. So how did I create the pendulum technique? And what made it so successful? Back in 2017, my setup was very different from what I use today. I used the half-ounce Spro bucktail, tipped with the 5-inch gulp mullet. Compared to the quarter-ounce jig with the 6-inch jerkshad, it was much heftier. And here's the thing. Back then, I was pretty new to using a single jig. There's a learning curve for a lot of people starting out. One of the biggest hurdles was feeling the jig hit the bottom, especially on the drop after a cast. And frankly, I struggled with it for a while. I couldn't tell if I was using a heavy enough jig, so I had to force myself to feel it. I mean, when the jig is falling, what can I do to maximize the feel of the jig when it thumps the bottom? The only way to ensure that feel is to keep the line between the rod and lure as tight as possible. That way I could feel connected to the jig via feel. To do that, I had to do more than reel up the slack after a cast or pop the jig off the bottom. I also need to raise the rod tip to keep the bow of the line as minimal as possible. Coincidentally, this slowed the fall rate of the jig. Again, the main goal was to keep the line as tight as possible, but the result was a slower glide as the jig fell back to the bottom. On top of the pendulum glide, I imparted 3 dramatic pops to get the jig off the bottom, ensuring enough vertical height to get the jig to come off the seabed. What resulted was a serendipitous collision of this style and feeding fluke. My first trips after nailing this technique resulted in some incredible catches. Limits with fluke well over 20 inches. So began the pendulum chapter in my early years of single jigging for fluke. Going back to familiar back bay waters and replicating that success over and over again. The pop, the glide, the feeling of the thump of a fluke on a jig's fall. I felt darn good and confident in the technique, but I didn't really know why it worked. Could it even be translated outside those familiar back bay waters? And what brings me to this. Success is not always correlated with your holistic understanding of how to target fluke with a single jig. Case in point, you can dial in a technique like the pendulum swing on a half-ounce Spro mullet setup, pound the same waters, which I did back then, until the bite starts to dry up. You're then forced to branch out to new waters, which is what happened a couple years into my single jigging tenure. Also, jigging a half-ounce jig all day wears on your arms. That's when I started experimenting with a 3/8-ounce jig head in a 5-inch grub setup. I went lighter to fish in shallower waters where a half-ounce jig was overkill. The 3/8 ounce jig and 5-inch grub became the next iteration of the single jig and the deadly combo for the next year or so in the back bays. It was also well suited for the pendulum technique, the pop and slow glide. Also, the collars on the ball jig heads kept the gulp on longer, and the ball jig kept the overall presentation cleaner. The reduced weight also helped keep my arms fresher during a long day of fishing. At that time, I was still using a heavy pendulum technique, allowing the grub to glide through the water column for increased strikes. But even though it was effective, it had its limitations. For one, the grub's bigger profile added more drag in the current, making fishing out front clunkier. Its increased drag also created issues in heavier currents. And at that time, I was becoming more and more interested in fishing out front. Then came the fateful day in 2019 when my buddy Keith and I first used the jerkshad. It was early in the season, water temps in the mid-50s, back bay on a dock where I struggled all morning to get a consistent bite on my 5-inch grub. So out came the jerkshad. One pack of 5-inch pro whites and a 3/8 ounce ball jig. The first 3 casts with that setup resulted in 2 keepers in the short, back to back to back. We knew right then and there that this is going to be the next evolution of the single jig combo. Fishing the jerkshad was quite different from the mullet or grub. The forked tail and slim profile reduced drag in the water, quickening its fall rate compared to the grub and mullet. Going to a lighter jig, specifically the 1/4 ounce, helps compensate for this slimmer, faster profile. For the back bays, the 1/4 ounce jig with the 6-inch jerkshad is pretty much a perfect combo, especially in water over 7 feet deep. And this setup translated to fishing our waters out front, particularly with deeper troughs and cuts along the beach. For the next few years, it was lights out with this combo. Also, as I became more comfortable fishing lighter jigs, I started to move away from the pendulum technique that I held onto for so long. But again, like with any other setup, it also has its limitations. Here's the rub. Our shorelines in the tri-state area are divided based on geological surroundings. A lot of the back bays we fish are over 7 feet deep, ranging to 15 feet. This includes docks, piers, jetties, and bulkheads. Out front, beaches vary a lot based on their location in relation to these geological structures. Take New Jersey, for example. New Jersey is really a tale of 2 beach styles. In the north, your beaches out front are deeper, in places like Sandy Hook, which is heavily influenced by the geological makeup of the Hudson Cliffs. On the flip side, the barrier islands that make up southern New Jersey lean toward shallower waters. On top of that, you have the constant parade of beach replenishment, which continues to alter the depth and makeup of our beaches. When I first really got into the 1/4 ounce jig in 2019, I was fishing mostly the back bays, the tri-state area, and the beaches in northern New Jersey, which have deeper troughs, channels, and cuts because of their proximity to those cliffs. But as I ventured away from those waters and focused my fishing primarily out front, I noticed that the 1/4 ounce jig became less effective in the waters south. That's because those beaches are shallower. So I began experimenting with lighter jigs and found a sweet spot with the 1/8 ounce ball jig. The 1/8 ounce jig, the 8 ball as I call it, unlocks things you wouldn't get with a 1/4 ounce jig. It really shines when fishing hard and soft structures out front and in shallower back bays where the bigger fluke tend to hang out. The way the jig reacts to your rod and swims under the water is very different from a 1/4 ounce jig. I covered the specifics of how I fished this jig in my online lesson. Aside from the 1/8 ounce jig, I also use 2 additional weights that fall between the 1/8 and 1/4 ounce range. I'll say I use the 1/8 ounce 75% of the time and the other fleet of jigs 25% of the time. Now when it comes to the 1/4 ounce jig, I'm not abandoning it by any means, and neither should anyone listening to this video. But having a jig weight system is something I do believe in. Just like in golf, you have a myriad of widgets to get your ball closest to the pen. You can have a fleet of jig weights to help you fish a trough or stretch of water in the most optimal way, without fighting the jig. Throughout my 8+ years of fishing the single jig, I have a pretty good grip on fishing the jig in a variety of ways, including with or without tension, combating crosswinds, and fishing over hard, sticky structure. The seamless connection to the jig and the versatile arsenal of jig sizes gives you the freedom to fish how you want. My pendulum days are long gone, replaced by a myriad of approaches. And that's my philosophy that I want to instill. There's no one, two, or even three ways to fish a jig. What's more important is understanding how to match your technique to your surroundings. And again, I cover all of this in depth in my online course. Alright, that's all I got to say. Peace out till next time.